Miles and miles of yellow sand, treeless mountain ridges, and scorching hot sun over your head. And suddenly, something you'd never expect to come across in a barren desert. A small group of overexcited people. They're as happy as you would be if you'd won a lottery. They've just found an ancient tomb, once flooded with its walls in bad shape. But the stuff they discovered inside proves that this is the burial site of one of Egypt's most mysterious pharaohs. Historians have been hunting for his tomb for years, but no one expected it to hide ancient treasures. Fast forward. After careful examination of the site, Egyptian officials have announced the discovery of the tomb of King Thutmos II. It's the last missing tomb from Egypt's 18th dynasty. And this is also the first royal tomb found since King Tutankhamun's was discovered in 1922, in more than 100 years. A team of Egyptian and British archaeologists found the tomb in the Theban Mountains area, west of Luxor, near the famous Valley of the Kings. Before this, the site was only known as Tomb C4, but during their excavation, the team found clear evidence proving it belonged to King Thutmos II. Archaeologists actually found the entrance and main tunnel leading to the tomb in 2022. But at first, they thought it belonged to a queen because it was near the graves of Thutmos III's wives. It was also close to Queen Hatshepsut's tomb. Originally, it was prepared for her when she was just a royal wife, but everything changed when she became pharaoh. But we'll talk about this twist of fate a little later. But soon they realized that their discovery was much more significant. They found alabaster jars with Thutmos II's name and the words "deceased king" written on them. That's when they realized that the tomb was actually his final resting place. Sadly, Thutmos II's tomb has seen better days. According to the head of Egypt's antiquities sector and the leader of the Egyptian excavation team, the tomb suffered major damage from ancient floods not long after the pharaoh's death. Water swept through the burial chamber, likely destroying or displacing many of the original artifacts. Much of what had been once inside the tomb was moved elsewhere in an attempt to salvage it. The researchers found out that the tomb had a basic design, with an entrance, a sloping main corridor, and a burial chamber. The corridor was coated in white plaster and rose about 4.5 feet above the floor of the burial chamber. A large staircase and a very large descending corridor of the tomb indicated its grandeur. It took the team a long time to navigate through, though, as the tomb was blocked by flood debris and collapsed ceilings. Only after crawling through a 32-foot passageway with a small 16-inch gap at the top, the worst nightmare for those of us with claustrophobia, were they able to reach the burial chamber. There, they were in for another surprise. They cleared the debris, expecting to find the crushed remains of a burial beneath. But the tomb turned out to be completely empty, and it was not due to robbery. It had been deliberately emptied. The researchers soon realized that the tomb had been flooded since it had been built underneath a waterfall. It happened just a few years after the king's burial, so the contents of the tomb were moved to another location. That's why there was a second corridor in the tomb. It was most likely made to help remove King Thutmos II's body from his flooded tomb. Despite the damage, the excavation team made some really exciting discoveries. They found traces of mortar decorated with blue inscriptions, yellow stars, and fragments from the Book of Amduat, one of the most significant funerary texts in ancient Egypt. The book was meant to guide the deceased through the underworld, ensuring a safe journey to the afterlife. Now, how about we sneak a peek at ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty? It was all about conquering lands, expanding the empire, and building jaw-dropping monuments. Some of the biggest names from that era, Thutmos I and Thutmos III, both legendary warrior kings who left their mark in history. Thutmos I was a fierce fighter who led major military campaigns, pushing Egypt's border further south than ever before, all the way to the fourth cataract of the Nile. His victories gave Egypt access to new trade routes, stronger political ties, and more wealth. His conquests were so significant that they were recorded in the tombs of his top officials. Thutmos III, sometimes called Thutmose the Great, took things even further. He was not only an incredible military strategist, but also the commander of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's armies before becoming king himself. He led between 17 and 20 military campaigns, winning every single one and expanding Egypt's empire to its peak. He even created the world's first navy. Thutmose III is often remembered as Egypt's greatest warrior pharaoh. And sandwiched between these two powerhouses was Thutmose II, a pharaoh who doesn't get nearly as much attention. Hey, the middle child, right? His reign lasted only about 5 years before he passed away at around age 30 in 1479 BCE. He is kind of a mystery. No one really knows what he accomplished. For the longest time, even the location of his burial site was totally unknown. His body was actually found in the 19th century. It was just lying around in the mortuary temple of Deir el-Bahari, in a secret chamber where priests used to hide royal mummies centuries after their original tombs were looted by grave robbers. In other words, Thutmose II's body must have been moved from his original resting place at some point in history to protect it. During his lifetime, Thutmose II made at least one major impact on Egyptian history. He married his half-sister Hatshepsut. That might not sound like a big deal, but it helped her become Egypt's greatest female pharaoh after he passed. The catch? She kept her stepson, Thutmose III, off the throne for decades. When he finally took power, he erased her name from history out of spite. And still, Hatshepsut is one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, no matter if you're talking about a man or a woman. She brought a lot of wealth and art to Egypt. She led a big trading trip to a place called Punt, where she brought back things like gold, ebony, and incense. She also made sure her name lasted by building amazing structures that we can still see today. At Karnak, she added huge obelisks. One of them is still standing tall. She also was the one to build the Temple of Deir el-Bahari with its countless columns. She was buried there. Interestingly, Hatshepsut was often shown in art as a man, with muscles and a beard, like how pharaohs were usually depicted. But she made sure there was always something in the artwork that reminded people she was a woman, like calling herself Daughter of Re, or His Majesty herself. When she passed away in 1458 BCE, Egypt wouldn't have a female ruler as powerful as her until Cleopatra, about 1400 years later. According to Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General, isn't that a mouthful? Hatshepsut's name actually appears in Thutmose II's tomb, meaning she might have even handled his burial. As for their final resting places, well, Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and Thutmose II's mummy is now in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, alongside other ancient Egyptian rulers. It gives visitors a rare chance to see the remains of a nearly forgotten pharaoh. Now, experts consider the discovery of his tomb to be one of the most significant in recent years. The artifacts found there add important details to our understanding of the history of the region and Thutmose II's rule. And even though the tomb's design is fairly simple and follows the same architectural style preferred by later Egyptian rulers, its historical importance is undeniable. In any case, the mission isn't over yet. Archaeologists are now focusing on solving another mystery. Where did the rest of the tomb's contents end up? The team is determined to continue their search. Who knows what other secrets they will uncover that have remained hidden beneath the sands for thousands of years.
During the early 1920s, the world was mesmerized by King Tut. A British archaeologist, Howard Carter, discovered the young pharaoh's tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, 1922. But the public wasn't only interested in gold and jewelry. The press wrote about the curse of the pharaohs, but was it true? Was an ancient curse really the reason everyone entering the pyramids lost their lives? At the time, this was the only explanation for a series of unexplained passings. The man present at the opening of King Tut's burial chamber, George Herbert V, Earl of Carnarvon, lived only 5 more months after the discovery. He had also sponsored the dig. In comes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You probably know of him. the English writer behind Sherlock Holmes. He claimed that an evil elemental caused the explorer's demise. He must have been joking, right? Unfortunately, no. The newspapers continued to blame the Pharaoh's curse after every Egyptologist left this world. These are the scientists who study the ancient cultures of Egypt. The archaeologist who opened King Tutankhamun's tomb passed away full 17 years after the discovery. The reason for it wasn't a secret: Hodgkin's disease. Yet again, journalists around the world wrote of a curse. This was getting ridiculous. But science must have had a rational explanation, right? Well, it did. And that explanation was common mold. Harmful fungi, Aspergillus, can survive for ages in sealed tombs. When humans inhale them, there's a high risk of infection in people who have a weakened immune system. Today, doctors believe this is what happened to the unfortunate explorer more than a century ago. Scientists now know that this type of fungi grows especially well on grain. And King Tut's tomb was full of offerings in the form of baskets full of raw grain and bread. Researchers discovered other varieties of fungi on ancient Egyptian mummies. These molds can easily cause some nasty consequences for humans. The danger of rotting organic material is real. Just look inside your fridge. Any food leftovers you have there start to go off after just 3 to 4 days. You can imagine what happens to food in a sealed chamber after thousands of years. Food is just one kind of organic material. There is also wood. If you expose it to water or even moisture in the air, it starts to deteriorate. You don't have to travel to Egypt to see the effects of this process. Any abandoned building in your neighborhood can serve as an example. When a piece of wood gets wet and has no way of drying out, there is going to be damage. From fungi to wood-boring insects, the list is long. Rotten wood presents a huge structural issue. Beams and floor panels are all made of timber, so you better not go inside a failing building. You can easily lose your footing. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The building materials since the time of the pharaohs have changed, but so have the dangers. One of the best examples is asbestos. Until the 1970s, most home insulation materials contained this substance. It was in everything, from boilers to soundproofing. This microfiber provided excellent heat insulation. But then, the United States banned asbestos in 1989. The UK did the same a decade later. The reason for it is that asbestos becomes a health hazard when it gets damaged. When humans inhale asbestos fibers, they can get seriously sick. Abandoned structures are full of this material, and there is no one to maintain them. You see the danger now. Another material is also common in old buildings: lead. Ancient Romans used lead piping to channel spring water into their homes. They also cooked in lead vessels, which was probably not the wisest of choices. You see, lead and water don't go well together because of something called corrosion. But this problem isn't ancient. US officials banned lead piping only in 1986. That means that 7% of American households still have lead service lines. And this is not the only source of poisoning. Until the mid-1960s, builders used lead paint to coat woodwork. In abandoned buildings, this lead coating snapped a long time ago. Anyone who touches doors and windows will disturb this lead dust and inhale it. The dust particles are at least visible to an unaided eye. This is not the case for carbon monoxide. This gas has no color, so you can't see it. It has no odor, so you can't smell it. No way to detect a carbon monoxide leak at all. And how does this dangerous gas usually escape? Poor maintenance. Well, abandoned buildings have zero maintenance. 1 second, you could be exploring an old factory, and the next you could feel dizzy with and have a terrible headache. These are just some of the symptoms of CO poisoning, the less severe ones. But what is the source? All it takes is for an old boiler to finally give way after years of neglect. We've reached an important question. What is the main factor in air quality inside a room? If you are thinking the level of oxygen, try again. It turns out that oxygen levels drop by only 0.3% in 8 hours inside an airtight room. This is a room in which doors and windows are sealed with tape, so the decrease is even smaller in normal conditions. Oxygen isn't the main problem. The levels of carbon dioxide rise sharply inside a sealed room. This is the direct result of human breathing. We inhale oxygen and exhale CO2. Think of it as a waste gas. Normally it's only a tiny portion of the air we breathe, 0.04%. But in a sealed room, High levels of carbon dioxide will make you feel drowsy. And that's the last thing you need when inside a dilapidated building. Carbon dioxide will decrease your ability to think clearly. Researchers from Harvard did an interesting study in 2016. They had office workers come in 6 days in a row to complete a problem-solving test. During the week, they gradually raised the carbon dioxide levels in the mock-up office. The results of the same test kept getting worse over time. There are many factors at play, but CO2 levels definitely had an impact on the workers' problem-solving ability. The test took place inside a typical office environment, not inside a crumbling building where visitors must watch their every step. When I say visitors, I really mean trespassers, and trespassing is a criminal offense in the United States. This goes both for private and public property. If you defy the law, you can be fined up to $5,000 or even face lockup time. That should make you think twice before jumping over a fence with a no trespassing sign. But again, you might not be the only one inside. You can never know who else is in the building. Perhaps a person up to no good? It doesn't have to be a person at all. Animals can pose a threat as well. You would be startled if you saw a rat, for example. But the poor animal would be scared as well. It might bite you. The list of diseases rats carry is pretty long. But rodents' teeth can cause other forms of damage. They grow constantly, so the animal has to constantly nibble on something to stop them from overgrowing. If you ever felt peckish at 1 a.m., you know the feeling. Electric cables are high on the rodents' menu. Abandoned buildings have plenty of those. Old wiring is dangerous on its own. Structures erected before 1984 often used wires made out of aluminum. Today, copper is the standard because an aluminum wire is 55 times more likely to catch on fire than a copper one. Flipping a switch in a rundown building can cost you your life. Be on alert for telltale signs that something is wrong. Lights that flicker, sparks from sockets, and the smell of smoke. And yeah, don't count on an earth cable to protect you from electrocution. Ground cables became standard only in the 1960s.
So looky here, scientists discovered ancient artifacts near King Tut's tomb. Turns out, his VIP final resting place looks more like a public graveyard with about a dozen wooden coffins that's been there for around 3,600 years. Okay, I might have exaggerated a tad. The 11 tombs weren't exactly right next to King Tut, but they were close, near the same city of Luxor. New findings in Egyptian tombs can help us piece together what life was like in ancient Egypt. And guess what? Ancient Egyptians seem to have been remarkably like us, modern humans. Say, the women have always loved jewelry, and archaeologists retrieved a beautifully made necklace with 30 amethyst beads and 2 agate beads, plus a hippo head amulet. Bet it was all the rage back then. Researchers also discovered 2 copper mirrors. One had a handle shaped like a lotus, and the other was decorated with Hathor, the ancient Egyptian deity of the sky, women, fertility, and love. These recent excavations near Tutankhamun's burial site led to another jaw-dropping revelation. For the first time in thousands of years, fragments of Queen Hatshepsut's Valley Temple were uncovered. This fearless woman was thought to be the second female pharaoh, who ruled with both courage and wisdom, leaving a legacy as solid as the stones themselves. Her temple, hidden for ages, opens a window into a time filled with power, intrigue, and spiritual devotion. Archaeologists found over 1,000 beautifully decorated stone blocks on the outskirts of Hatshepsut's funerary temple. There were very few women who managed to take the throne in ancient Egypt. Another tomb was found nearby, and it belonged to the overseer of Queen Teti Sheri's palace, whose name was Jehuti-Mez. Queen Hatshepsut seems to have even more tombs, aces up her sleeve. These tombs were carved into the rock instead of being built as pyramids, showing a unique ancient perspective on how to protect the soul in the afterlife. Experts managed to retrieve some cool ancient pieces from the site. Toys made of clay, mummy masks, winged scarabs, and some amulets. Sadly, there surely used to be way more artifacts, but over the last centuries, there have been people other than archaeologists to stumble upon this site. It's likely that looters got to these tombs before them and may have taken some valuable items. But they did leave behind some cool stuff for the researchers. like pottery used for offerings of bread and meat, along with archers' bows that connect the tomb's owners to the Egyptian military. Meanwhile, soul protection is way more important than you might think, especially if you're roaming around Luxor looking for ancient secrets. You aren't scared of King Tut's curse, are you? Let me tell you what happened to those who weren't scared, but promise me to take it with a dash of salt, okay? For years, Egyptologists, especially those who believed in paranormal activity, were convinced that there was an unsettling curse surrounding Tutankhamun's archaeological discoveries. This belief stemmed from the mysterious and untimely demise of several excavators who discovered the tomb in 1922 with no logical explanation for why they passed away. It was just easier to chalk it up to something supernatural and avoid the whole mess. But it turns out it wasn't a curse at all. It was likely the radiation that caused those excavators to perish. Now, you might wonder where the radiation came from. After all, while radioactivity was discovered in the 19th century, ancient Egyptians, despite their impressive pyramids, didn't have any radium lying around to make Tut's tomb glow like crazy. So, what could be the real story? It might have been toxic waste behind it all. Toxic levels of radiation from uranium and hazardous waste have been lurking inside the tomb since it was sealed over 3,000 years ago. The burial chamber of Tutankhamun's tomb reportedly has such high radiation levels that anyone who steps inside could easily end up with a fatal dose of radiation sickness or an incurable condition. By the way, you can have a somewhat similar level of radioactivity if you don't get rid of those moldy dinner leftovers you left to perish in your fridge a month ago. But this radioactivity isn't exclusive to Tutankhamun's tomb. Ancient Egyptian artifacts discovery is rewarding yet dangerous due to unusually high radiation levels in Old Kingdom tombs all over Egypt. Geiger counters have detected radiation at 2 sites near the Giza pyramids, and radon, a radioactive gas, has been found in several underground tombs in Saqqara. Interestingly, experts believe that the builders of these ancient tombs were aware of the toxins, as some eerie warnings were carved into the walls of many tombs. One inscription ominously declared, "They that break this tomb shall meet their end by a malady that no doctor can diagnose." Other ominous phrases like "forbidden," "due to evil spirits," only added to the fear that supernatural curses haunted these ancient sites. Ominous signs have stunned archaeologists since forever, but the fear grew even stronger a century ago with the mysterious passing of Lord Carnarvon, who funded King Tut's excavation in 1922 and reportedly explored the treasure-filled rooms, along with several others who entered the tomb. Arthur Weigall, another British Egyptologist who was present at the tomb's opening and is credited with starting the curse myth, passed away young when he was just in his 50s in 1934. Chances are the condition that made him pass was connected to radiation. In total, 6 out of the 26 people who were there when the tomb was opened met their end within a decade from various causes. Not only X-ray exposure, those reasons include asphyxia, stroke, heart failure, pneumonia, and even poisoning. Well, isn't this getting a little grim? There was one guy who opened the tomb and somehow managed to avoid the infamous curse, Howard Carter, or so it seemed. Some folks pointed to his survival as proof that the curse wasn't real. After digging up the tomb, Carter published several books on the topic and shifted gears from archaeology to dealing in antiquities for various museums. Despite dodging demise or injury, rumors swirled about how the curse may have impacted him in other ways. One of the big stories linked him to Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Evelyn. Some said he was madly in love with her, but she married someone else, so he chose to stay single. Others claimed they had an affair while she was in Egypt, which ended when her father passed away and she left the country for good. However, there wasn't much evidence to support these stories. Evelyn was just 6 when they met, and they remained friends until his last breath. She was even one of the few attendees at his funeral, but denied any romantic involvement, saying they weren't that close. A year after the revolutionary discovery near King Tut's tomb, Evelyn married politician Sir Brograve Beauchamp and had a daughter. That same year, Beauchamp toured the tomb with his parents, guided by Carter himself. Carter never married and, aside from those posthumous rumors about Evelyn, had no other romantic connections. While the curse adds an intriguing twist to his life story, his tendency to keep relationships at arm's length was evident long before the tomb was opened. It seemed Carter just wasn't a people person. In 1939, after battling a serious illness, he ultimately succumbed to fate. He was 64, which was a pretty common life expectancy in the UK back then, so no one really thought it was off and linked it to an ancient curse. When he passed, it turned out he had several artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb in his London apartment, which were eventually sent back to Egypt, marking what some viewed as the curse's end. Who knows? Maybe if he hadn't had all those ancient souvenirs at his place, he would have lived way longer. But all the other demises might seem off. The curse theory was likely fueled by some strange events during the excavation. Carnarvon got a mosquito bite that became severely infected, and around the time they opened the tomb, Cairo experienced a bizarre power outage and a freak sandstorm. Back in England, the Earl's dog, Susie, managed to escape from Carnarvon's house and began barking frantically at seemingly nothing. At least that's what the staff and family saw. Strangely enough, at the very moment her owner's heart stopped, Susie started howling and fell down without showing any signs of life. Maybe radiation didn't play a crucial role after all, and those were indeed ancient artifacts from King Tut's tomb that made them all perish. Spooky, huh?
We all know some iconic symbols. The Statue of Liberty screams USA. The Eiffel Tower represents Paris. And this mask? Undoubtedly, it's Tutankhamun's, right? Sometimes it feels like historians have squeezed every last drop out of the King Tut story. But guess what? The most obvious details often slip right under our noses. Like the fact that this famous mask didn't actually belong to him, nor was it ever meant for him. Stick with me for the details. Can we get a close-up of that mask? Thanks. See those holes? Yep, they're for earrings. And no, it's not that they had anything against jewelry, but back in ancient Egypt, earrings were typically worn by high-status women or kids. Now, if you know your history, you might say, but Tut was a boy king, wasn't he? You're spot on. He began his reign at just 9 years old. Sadly, that didn't last long as he passed away at a very young age. So when he was 9, he might have worn earrings, but he probably took them off when he hit that no earrings age. Sounds reasonable, right? Actually, not quite. That would have been pretty strange since nobody expected him to pass away young. Certainly not at 9. So no one was preparing a kid's mask for a burial. It's this untimely demise that suggests that the mask used was simply the best option available when Tut passed away. There are more clues pointing to the idea that the mask was found in a hurry. Let's think about this. Even though Tut was mummified and his body could wait a bit, his loved ones wanted him to reach the afterlife ASAP. Some experts even believe the paint in the tomb was still wet when it was sealed. But look at his mask. It's a masterpiece. There's no way it was made in a rush. It's way more elaborate than other simpler cartonnage pieces. The renowned mask of King Tut stands 21 inches tall, adorned with precious stones, and features a golden beard that weighs 5.5 pounds, making the entire mask 22.5 pounds. Okay, I'm a bit confused here. So it seems like it was probably a kid's mask, but it had a beard? I've never seen a 9-year-old with a goatee, and I'm guessing you haven't either. Just think about it. A grown man's face compared to a kid's face. Fun fact for you, our faces pretty much stopped growing at the age of 16, so by 19, Tut would have definitely had the face of an adult man. Can you imagine trying to fit a relatively small kid's mask on a grown man? That would have been super embarrassing, and no one would have let that happen. Right, let's dismiss the kids' theory. Now, the second option, if you remember, is that the mask could have originally belonged to a woman. This is where the beard theory comes into play. Some researchers believe the beard might have been added later on. Here's another twist. What if the mask was actually made for Nefertiti herself, who ended up maskless? In this case, there are two discoveries. Two birds with one stone. For now, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, I know. But let's give it a shot and delve deeper into the details. So, Tut passed away in around 1323 BCE, probably due to malaria. He had other health issues too, like when he broke his leg, and records suggest he wasn't in the best shape. As for Nefertiti, we have no solid data about her demise. Plus, nobody knows exactly when or where she was buried. The supposed year when she passed away is around 1330 BCE, but she could have lived longer, and the mask was intended and prepared for her. Or maybe they just took her mask right from the burial chamber. After all, they were family. Well, sort of. She was said to be his stepmom, having been married to Akhenaten, who was likely Tut's father. But this is not 100% accurate. Some scientists doubt it. Ah, these ancient Egyptian families. It's hard to keep track of who's who. I know, you're not yet convinced that Tut wore a lady's mask. Let me share one more theory with you. Meet Howard Carter, the enthusiastic archaeologist who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. It was located in the Valley of Kings outside Luxor and, to everyone's surprise, was nearly intact. When he entered, he noticed something odd. This didn't feel like a pharaoh's burial chamber. It was classy and all, but it had a vibe that suggested it was made for a woman. Typically, Egyptian pharaohs had larger tombs that suited them better, and even more strangely, it was oriented to the right of the entrance. This didn't add up. That orientation was typical for female chambers, which Egyptian queens used. Another red flag was that the chamber appeared to have been built in stages, and all the artifacts, around 2,000 of them, seemed hastily placed there. Even more curious, they looked like they were meant for other royals. Carter discovered this burial site in 1922, but it remained a mystery as to why it was so bizarre. Almost a century later, Nicholas Reeves thought he may have solved the puzzle. He claimed that King Tut might not have been the original resident of the tomb. Instead, he suggested that the undisturbed resting place of the legendary Queen Nefertiti could be hidden behind the walls of the boy king's burial chamber. Nicholas studied high-resolution photos for months, meticulously examining every pixel. One day, he focused on detailed scans that revealed the texture of the tomb's walls beneath layers of paint. He spotted what he believed to be outlines of two doorways that had been blocked and plastered over to hide them from view. The more he looked, the more it seemed real. Could it be a tomb within a tomb? Nicholas theorized there was a hidden storeroom behind the western wall of King Tut's tomb, and his chamber might just be the outermost section of a larger corridor-style network of rooms. It all sounds fancy, but sorry to break it to you, Reeves' theory was debunked. To find out if he was onto something, experts had to use ground-penetrating radar to see the unseen. Reeves' idea was that if there were gaps, it could indicate the presence of additional rooms. And at first, in 2015, one expert even thought he had found a hidden room. But the glory didn't last for long. A year later, after double-checking, it turned out there were no hidden doorways. By the way, Nefertiti isn't the only legendary woman from Egypt whose burial site remains a captivating mystery. There's a cool legend about Cleopatra that you might enjoy. It's said that she once declared, "No man will ever find my tomb." Kind of fitting, right? After all, the person who's come closest to uncovering her final resting place is a woman. Fast forward a few millennia after she passed away, and while no man has located it, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez believes she might have cracked the code. She's been on the quest for Cleopatra VII's tomb for nearly 20 years, and recently discovered a bust that she thinks represents the famous queen. However, not everyone is on board with her claim. Some experts argue that the bust doesn't resemble Cleopatra at all. Alongside this intriguing marble statue, Martinez's team also unearthed 337 coins, some of which, less controversially, feature Cleopatra's likeness. But the real part is that it's still not officially confirmed. There's no doubt about the existence of the small bust. It's carved from white marble, fits in one hand, and shows a woman wearing a royal crown, according to a translated statement from the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. The big question, though, is who it actually depicts. While Martinez insists this statue is a representation of Queen Cleopatra VII, many other archaeologists argue that the facial features don't match, suggesting it likely belongs to a princess instead. Sorry, I can't resist the temptation of breaking the magic for a moment. Some folks believe that the whole idea of "no man will find my tomb" is misunderstood. Even if she did say it, what she probably meant was "no living soul," and it wasn't about gender at all. It can as well be just a beautiful legend. Toodaloo!
Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life, from age 0 to age 80, working on the Stonehenge project, it would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed, did they? Well, actually, they existed, and some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk. Yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago, just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, the smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy, and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities.
In 1975, in Puerto Rico, a farmer saw most of his goats lying lifeless on the ground. He got closer and saw that the animals were stiff and had 2 puncture marks on their necks. Goats were not the only animals that were hurt. Many pigs, cows, and geese lost their lives too. They all had the same distinctive bite marks on their necks, and all had been drained of their vital fluids. The locals immediately jumped to conclusions and blamed dogs, and the authorities didn't bother to do a better investigation and just said dogs had done it without looking for any proof. A couple of days later, though, many more animals were found deceased. Among them was a cow that had literally been opened, and it had a lot of scratches on its head. The farmer next door reported that his chickens had been destroyed by something. In just a few weeks, the creature took the lives of 90 farm animals. After some time, another farmer said that 10 of his goats had been drained, 7 had been hurt, and 11 were missing. This time, the authorities didn't waste any time and started the monster hunt, but they had no luck finding the culprit. The incident was all over the local newspaper, and the beast was named the Vampire of Mocha. The incident caught the attention of the Agricultural Commission, and scientist Juan Rivera was tasked to solve this otherworldly mystery. His first suspect was a Puerto Rican boa. This non-venomous snake can grow to be a little over 6 feet. Still, its diet consists of only small prey. It's also very shy of humans and other animals. It avoids bigger creatures at all costs. You're more likely to see fish climbing trees than this boa taking down a whole cow. Near the crime scene, a large cave was discovered, and we all know that weird creatures like living in dark, cold caves. In the cave, they found some crazy-looking bats. As we've seen in movies, bats can turn into vampires, so they must be the culprit. But no, bats were as innocent as they could be. Their favorite food wasn't cows or goats, it was figs. They were peaceful fruit-eating bats that didn't care about animals. Again, the researcher hit a wall. Suddenly, all the terror stopped in July 1975. It seemed like the creature had vanished into thin air, but not for long. 2 decades later, 62 miles from the previous site, more animals were found. A local vet examined them. He was terrified to discover that every animal had 2 precisely cut holes like he had never seen before. The animals were anemic and looked like they'd passed away recently. By the looks of it, the creature's favorite food was goats, and that's how it got the infamous name we all heard of, chupacabra, which means the goat sucker. Dogs, chickens, rabbits, and other animals were not off the menu. In short time, the chupacabra took 1,000 farm animals. Now, this animal had a name, but people still had zero idea about what the chupacabra looked like, which was terrifying. In Canovanas, Madeline and her mother reported seeing a weird creature that could have been the chupacabra. They said it had been walking on 2 legs like a human and resembled a kangaroo. They mentioned that the monster also had spikes on the back, no ears, large dark eyes, and 2 holes for a nose. It had 2 arms with 3 fingers. The chupacabra seemed to like Madeline's house because her husband and his coworker found it in the garage. They tried to capture it, but didn't succeed. Madeline later drew a detailed sketch of it. Many people saw the sketch and reported seeing a similar creature. They claimed it had strong legs and wings and smelled like sulfur. Take all these descriptions with a grain of salt. If they'd been true, they would have been all over the news. But still, keep in mind these descriptions. They will be important later in the story. In 1976, on some talk show, they talked about the chupacabra, and the show quickly went viral. Soon, people started reporting having seen a similar creature in Florida and Mexico. Many said that the stories were like a unicorn rodeo. They were totally made up. In Mexico, 2 skeptical inquiries, Patricia and Mario, laid traps around those farms where the chupacabra had allegedly been seen. They caught some animals in their traps, but no sign of the goat sucker. They only captured wild dogs. The police stated that the chupacabra was just a wild dog, not a mythical creature. And still, in the next 5 years, there were numerous sightings of the chupacabra worldwide. On the 13th of August of the year 2000, A farmer from Nicaragua found 25 of his sheep and 35 of his neighbor's sheep hurt. So he decided to take the matter into his own hands. One night, he was patiently waiting in the pitch black night for the creature to appear. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he saw something and managed to hit it. The creature passed away. Finally, they had proof that the chupacabra was not just a fairy tale. It was a big thing. Later, the chupacabra was examined by a vet. The vet was shocked because he had no idea what the creature was. Remember Madeleine's description? Well, the vet described the animal differently, but his story turned out to be more plausible. This chupacabra had large teeth, giant claws, greenish eyes, bat-like skin, and a crest sticking out of its back. The vet concluded that the animal was some kind of hybrid. They thought it was a cross between a wolf and a crocodile, but it sounds like an exaggeration and is hard to believe. We all know that such a mix is impossible. They did some tests on the body at the university in Nicaragua, and the results didn't quite deliver what they had expected. The animal was a wild dog with mange. Mange is an itchy skin disease that causes dogs to lose their hair. It's also highly contagious. When a dog has mange, their skin becomes scaly and wrinkled. When they returned the body, the farmer noticed it wasn't his chupacabra. 7 years later, another body was found in Texas. Phyllis Cannon returned to her farm and noticed that some of her chickens had passed away. All seemed to be anemic. Later, she saw coyote-looking creatures that didn't have any hair. More of her animals were harmed, so she had to set up cameras on her farm. But unfortunately, like always, she didn't manage to record anything. Surprisingly, she got a call from a local farmer who had found the chupacabra hit by a car. Later, another body was found much closer to her farm. She took some pictures of the animal, and soon, those images were all over the internet. Phyllis was curious and sent 5 DNA samples to 5 different universities. The results didn't match any animal in the archives. Researchers had no idea what it was, but it wasn't a dog. Phyllis still has one animal in her freezer and a taxidermied specimen in her house. There are many theories about the chupacabra. Some claim that the animal is a genetically modified monkey that escaped the lab. Others state that it's some mysterious, otherworldly creature. The most consistent hypothesis is that the chupacabra is a mix between a Mexican wolf and a coyote with mange. Now, do you remember that Phyllis said that she had sent samples to 5 universities and no match had been found? Well, it turned out she hadn't been telling the truth. At one university, they found that the animal was a mix between a coyote and a Mexican wolf and that it had mange. Animals with mange are weak and will likely try to hunt farm animals to survive. People, when they see something they don't know, tend to exaggerate, which is why all witnesses describe the animal differently.
Strange things occur in the cold waters of Antarctica. One of these things happened to a ship called Jenny. It was a small schooner whose history began in 1822. The boat and its crew set sail and disappeared a year later. For 18 years, the ship was considered sunk. People forgot about it. But in 1840, the vessel reminded the world of itself. That year, the whaling ship Hope sailed through the Drake Channel in Antarctica. The crew members noticed a ship among icebergs. It was the schooner Jenny. It was floating slowly in the dark, with no signs of life. The captain of the Hope, Mr. Brighton, gave the order to approach the mysterious vessel. They thought it was some creepy ghost ship. But as they came closer, they noticed crew members on the deck. The sailors of the Hope called out to them, but received no answer. This time, it became clear that something terrible had happened to the Jenny. When Brighton boarded, he realized that the Jenny crew members weren't missing. They were here. Frozen people stood like statues. Brighton went down to the lower deck and found the captain. He was sitting frozen at the table, holding a pen. Brighton looked at the logbook. The last record was made on May 4th, 1823. The captain wrote that he was the only living member of the crew. They spent 71 days without food. It seemed that the ship got lost in the sea because its captain went off course or sailed into an iceberg, but no one knew for sure. After that, nobody ever saw the Jenny again. According to rumors, the crew of the Hope abandoned the frozen ship and left it to drift in the cold waters. According to other rumors, this whole story is fiction. The story of the Jenny was described in a German magazine in the middle of the 19th century. Still, there was no further evidence of the ship's existence. Already in our time, Cambridge University decided to explore the case of the Jenny. The researchers discovered that one of the crew members of the Hope, who didn't disclose his name, told someone the legend of the frozen ship. Someone shared the story with another guy, and it was published in a German magazine called Globus. And that's all. There was no other evidence. One of the most famous ghost ships was the Mary Celeste, and there's no doubt about its existence. The history of this vessel was documented in court. People wrote about it in newspapers, but the most exciting thing is that the ship continued to be used even after 10 people disappeared from its deck. The history of the Mary Celeste began in Canada in 1861. When it was first built, the ship was called the Amazon. It changed captains several times, and it also hit some rocks. The boat was sold, bought, then sold again, repaired, and sailed under the name Mary Celeste. In 1872, it had a new captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a decent, brave man with a lot of experience in navigation. He had a beloved wife, a daughter, and a son. When he went on his last voyage, he took his wife and daughter with him, and his son stayed in America. In November of 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed from the port in New York with 10 people on board and disappeared. 8 days later, another ship, the Dei Gratia, also left New York and followed the same route. Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, noticed the Mary Celeste and immediately realized something was wrong. The ship was moving too freely, as if no one was controlling it. The captain tried to contact the crew members, but no one answered him. Then, together with other sailors, he climbed aboard the Mary Celeste. The ship was in good condition. There was no damage. The hold was slightly filled with water, but it could be easily pumped out. Everything seemed fine, but one lifeboat was missing. The crew members' valuables were in their cabins. The cargo was in the hold. The supplies of water and food were untouched. Judging by the records in the logbook, the ship was caught in a storm, but it was not too strong. Other ships also sailed through this storm, but nothing bad happened to them. The last record was dated November 25th, and it claimed that everything was fine. The sails of the Mary Celeste were slightly damaged, but perhaps it happened after the crew had disappeared. The whole ship was in excellent condition, but what made the people leave it? Part of the crew of the Dei Gratia stayed on board the Mary Celeste to bring it to dry land. Everything went well. They delivered the ship to the closest port. Next, the captain of the Dei Gratia appeared before the court and told about what had happened. However, the prosecutor and the judge didn't want to believe in the story of the Mary Celeste. They were sure the captain got rid of the ship's crew to get money for its cargo. According to the maritime laws of that time, if you found a ghost ship with valuable cargo, then a substantial part of this cargo belonged to you. So, many people thought that David Morehouse decided to earn some money. This version seemed to be more valid than the one about the mysterious disappearance of 10 people. Fortunately, no one accused the captain of committing a crime. They thanked him for his service and gave him a monetary reward. However, his reputation was damaged, which greatly affected his career, as many believed he attacked the crew of the Mary Celeste. But even after this terrible case, trial, and investigation, the story was not over. The Mary Celeste was still an expensive and efficient vessel. It sailed several times, but then one captain crashed it into the reefs to get insurance. The court revealed this deception and accused the captain of intentional property damage. The story of the Mary Celeste became famous all over the world. People began to build their theories, realistic and not. Someone believed the ship had sailed through the Bermuda Triangle, but this version was quickly refuted, as the route of the Mary Celeste passed thousands of miles away from the Bermuda region. Did the Kraken or another giant monster attack the ship? Nope. Since the boat was found in almost perfect condition, there were no signs of a struggle. One of the most popular versions was that the crew of the Mary Celeste stole some valuable cargo and sailed to Spain on the rescue boat. However, those who knew Captain Benjamin Briggs said he was a good, honest man. Besides, he had a son in New York, and Briggs would never leave him. A more thorough investigation revealed that a series of accidental circumstances could have caused the disappearance of the ship's crew. Before its last voyage, the vessel delivered coal. Perhaps the pump intended for pumping water got clogged with coal after that, and when the ship got into a storm, the hold filled with water and the pump broke. The captain couldn't understand the amount of water because numerous barrels in the cargo hold blocked the view. Benjamin Briggs assumed it was dangerous to stay on the ship during a storm, so he evacuated with the passengers on a lifeboat. Perhaps they were close to land and decided to sail there, but the storm intensified and overturned the boat. Also, one record in the log journal said that the chronometer was faulty. It was a device that helped to determine your location at sea using longitude. Briggs got lost and didn't know which way to sail. The storm was strong, and he couldn't determine whether the ship would sink. Perhaps Briggs decided to leave the ship in a rescue boat when he saw the coast of the Azores. The uniqueness of this ghost ship case is that, unlike many others, you can investigate it yourself. There's a lot of information about the Mary Celeste on the internet. There are documentaries and research articles. Perhaps you'll be able to notice something that others haven't seen and solve the mystery of the disappearance of 10 people.
Today we're going to an art history trip. Our main focus is to unravel the mystery of whether or not ancient statues has always been white. We'll visit museums and even time travel to try and get a glimpse of what these statues were really like back in the day. To kick off our tour, we land in New York. We climb the famous steps of the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and walk inside this enormous museum. You walk down the aisle and get to the room where one of the world's biggest collections of ancient Greek and Roman statues is held. Admiring the large array of statues, one thing seems evident. They are mainly white. It makes sense since their primary material is white marble. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and researchers in general have always taken this fact for granted. Weren't these statues always white? Until recent decades, this wasn't something that people discussed. But in the 1980s, researchers unearthed an ancient Greek statue that was clearly pigmented. This new discovery made them wonder, were all ancient statues painted? Let's take a close look at this work of art. This 3rd century before the Common Era Greek statue was discovered to be almost entirely painted, still in its original form. You don't have to look too hard to notice that the statue still carries some of these original pink colors, with some shades of blue and red paint as well. The thing is, this statue is not an exception, it's the norm. As it turns out, ancient civilizations did paint their sculptures with bright and vivid colors, but somewhere along our historic timeline, this information got lost. According to researchers, pigment in sculptures was a way of bringing their representations closer to real life. We live in bright colors, so art might as well reflect that, right? Right! So let's take a few steps back to understand what happened. So why are our museum's galleries filled with white statues as far as the eye could see? You might have heard of Michelangelo. It's a famous Italian sculptor who carved the iconic David and painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was one of the most emblematic painters of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a historical period when European artists, philosophers, and scientists developed a renewed interest in the creations of ancient Greece and Rome. Artists like Michelangelo studied a series of Roman sculptures, like this one, the Laocoon and his sons. They fell in love with their lifelike figures and pristine white marble. The one thing they didn't know, and didn't have the technology to know, was if the colored pigments from those sculptures had faded. After all, they were found after years of being buried or left in the open air. It's speculated that this statue, the Laocoon, had colored snakes and mantles, for example. When the Renaissance artists set out to pay homage to ancient artists, they left their masterpieces bare too. They carved directly onto the marble and left them white, without pigmentation. Probably because that's the way they thought things were done in the old days. The works of Michelangelo and his peers influenced a whole generation of sculptors after that. So this way of doing art traveled to modern times without much questioning. However, evidence of color pigments in ancient statues is abundant. Some researchers show that scholars have known for at least a century that ancient sculptures weren't originally all white. Other studies suggest that this discovery might have happened even earlier. In early 1980s, archaeologist Vincent Brinkmann made a huge discovery. During his time as a student at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, he developed a technology that was able to detect polychromy in ancient samples of Greek statues. Polychromy is an art of painting in several colors. Anyways, he was taken aback by his discovery and confused as to why and how other researchers and archaeologists weren't talking about this. As it happens, the first discovery that ancient statues weren't all that white happened a long time ago, way before Vincent was born. It happened during the unearthing of Pompeii back in the 1700s. As you may know, the city of Pompeii in southern Italy was completely covered with lava after the sudden eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The city was destroyed, but the clouds of ashes that arose from the lava managed to preserve a lot of the city's structure through time. Thankfully for art historians and archaeologists, Pompeii became a digging ground for understanding ancient Rome. Researchers found several conserved frescoes that depicted scenes of daily Roman life. In one of these paintings, an artist is seen painting a sculpture. This fact was recorded by a very famous art historian known as Johann Joachim Winckelmann. He is also considered the father of art history. Now let's take a closer look at another famous statue. To see this one in person, you'll have to fly all the way to Rome and visit the Vatican museums. The statue you're looking at is a classic representation of Caesar Augustus. In case you didn't know, he was the founder of the Roman Empire and the first emperor of Rome. He is important. The sculpture you're seeing is called the Augustus of Prima Porta. You may have seen this before, probably in a history textbook. The thing is, it's always depicted in its white marble form. But according to an archaeological finding from the 1860s, the original statue was way much more colorful than that. According to archaeologists, the statue of Augustus de Prima Porta has a crimson tunic, yellow armor, and a purple mantle. It's important to keep in mind that colors weren't made artificially as they are today. Artists could only produce color from natural resources, so purple, for example, was an extremely difficult color to make. Back in the day, they derived purple from the mucus of a rare species of snail, meaning that anyone who used the color purple to pigment their art and clothes was powerful and wealthy. Well, this looked like enough proof for me that ancient statues weren't always white. But as we can judge by the look of our modern museums, there didn't seem to exist enough interest in the art community to further explore polychromy on the ancient statues. But remember that archaeologist we talked about, Brinkman? Well, he has been collecting data on polychromy since the 1980s. At a certain point, he even began making colored replicas of such statues. The technology used is far from simple. To reconstitute these ancient works of art, Brinkman makes a 3D plaster copy of them. Then he paints them by hand with the help of his wife. To find out which color were used in the original sculptures, Brinkman uses UV light. Certain pigments glow under UV light, exposing traces that would otherwise be invisible. Take this colorful archer as an example. Look at these colors. This piece is the reconstruction of a marble archer in the costume of a horseman. To accurately depict the archer, restorers had to research a lot about the history of the region where the art piece was originally found, since colors have a cultural meaning. That, together with UV technology, allowed for the reconstruction you can now see. It seems very far from the idea we have of what the Greeks would make, but this is supposed to look exactly like the original one. According to Brinkman, we shouldn't be so surprised that ancient Western civilizations used bright colors to depict their realities. After all, the Romans and Greeks were heavily inspired by the works of art of Egyptian civilization, Old Mesopotamia, and Asia. For example, if you look at the famous Egyptian Sphinx, you might be led to believe that it always looked that way, but that wasn't at all the case. Modern studies and virtual reconstructions of the monument show us that the monument was very colorful. The body of the statue is believed to have been painted terracotta, while the regal headdress that circles the head is meant to have been golden blue. All of these were considered important colors in Egyptian times, and it was only suitable to use them to depict a pharaoh.
If there's a question that still baffles archaeologists to this day, it's this one. How did the ancient Egyptians build those magnificent pyramids? As far as we know today, their resources were quite limited, especially in terms of tools and building materials. We still don't have a fully satisfying answer, but hey, we've got some pretty amazing theories worth considering. The leading contender among these theories involves the clever Egyptians employing a sneaky strategy. Now picture this. They constructed a slanted and curving mound made of bricks, earth, and sand encircling the pyramid to be. As the pyramid grew taller and taller, they simply increased the height and length of this wacky structure. It's like they were playing an ancient game of Jenga. Now, how did they get those massive stone blocks up there? Well, according to the legendary ancient Greek historian Herodotus, they used sleds, rollers, and levers. It sounds like they turned construction into a supersized game of tug-of-war. And guess what? Herodotus also claimed that the Great Pyramid, you know, the one from Giza, the granddaddy of them all, took a whopping 20 years to build. There's more. Herodotus also dropped a mind-boggling number on us. 100,000 men were supposedly involved in this pyramid extravaganza. Did they hire the entire Egyptian population? Well, it might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. These men were probably mostly farmers, so they probably focused on the pyramids when there wasn't much work to be done in the fields. You know, like during the flood season of the Nile River. Obviously, specialists in the archaeological community had something to add to this theory. By the late 20th century, they discovered some evidence that suggests the workforce might have been smaller and more permanent than previously thought. Instead of a massive army of 100,000 pyramid builders, they proposed that a modest crew of around 20,000 workers, accompanied by support personnel like bakers, physicians, and even spiritual leaders, could have gotten the job done. There was also this theory that claimed that the pyramids were actually built from the top downward. It suggested that these colossal structures were nothing more than isolated hills used as quarries. The stones were supposedly drawn from these hills, and over time, competing engineers took charge and transformed them into the iconic pyramids we know today. Now, Before you dismiss this theory as a wild fantasy, some folks thought it wasn't completely crazy. After all, there are instances where isolated hills exist, so maybe this theory had a tiny glimmer of truth. Whether it involved ramp building or ingenious work schedules, one thing is clear: those pyramids have definitely left their mark on history and on our imaginations. Now, speaking of ancient Egyptian mysteries, there's this gigantic unfinished obelisk sitting in ancient Egypt, and scientists are trying to figure out how it was shaped. Now, some people suggest that our industrious ancestors used handheld pounders to get the job done. One expert has a different take on the matter, though. He argues that if we take a closer look at the pattern left behind by the shaping tool, we'll notice something peculiar. The walls of the trenches surrounding the obelisk display a neat and even pattern, which is pretty unlikely if they were pounded away by mere mortal hands. According to this expert, those horizontal striations are usually the result of a tool that takes breaks while removing material, leaving its mark on the surface. But wait, there's more. Imagine the tool being rocked back and forth against the trench walls, clearing away the waste to keep the trench from narrowing. Well, in that case, the tool might have left some funky horizontal striations where it was pressed against the sidewall. This sounds like some fancy technology at play, don't you think? And guess what? The dynastic Egyptians probably didn't have access to that kind of know-how. Another famous Egyptologist from way back also uncovered a bunch of core drills during his adventures. Although the actual drill bits are missing, his collection houses these particular core remnants made of limestone, alabaster, and even granite. These constructions aren't the only amazing thing the ancient Egyptians left behind, though. As it turns out, the Egyptians were the genius minds behind the creation of the handheld mirror. Yeah, that little mirror you use every day to check yourself out. But here's the twist. These mirrors are like pieces of art. They were decorated with inscriptions and figures. But that's not all. The Egyptians had a serious concern with their appearance. They knew the importance of personal hygiene and looking fabulous. So, in their quest for pearly whites, they invented toothbrushes and toothpaste. Dental problems were pretty common back then, and their smiles weren't exactly all white. Dentistry wasn't their strongest suit, you see. Maybe their minds were distracted by all that pyramid building. So that doesn't mean those ancient toothpaste recipes weren't amazing. One delightful concoction included rock salt, mint, dried iris petals, and pepper. Some brave dentists in the 21st century tried it out, and it worked pretty well. Ground-up ash was also used in another recipe to create a tooth cleansing paste. Mint was missing, so that didn't do much for their breath. That's when the genius Egyptians came up with the world's first breath mints. They made tablets from heated spices like cinnamon, and they mixed it with honey. Now, let's shift gears to home decor, Egyptian style. They surely took ornamentation to the next level. While the concept of decorating furniture started in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians cranked it up a notch. They went all out with different colors of ink and even developed various weights of paper. Oh, and let's not forget about those cute little area rugs we all have in our homes today. Guess who came up with the idea? Yep, the Egyptians. They used the versatile papyrus plant to make those cozy rugs. And speaking of trends, the Egyptians loved their knickknacks. They had an assortment of small figurines in the shapes of cats, dogs, and people. These statues were made from various materials, like simple sun-dried mud to the ultimate bling of gold. It all depended on how loaded you were. The Egyptians were also all about farming, and they knew that clean water was crucial for their crops and animals. That's why they came up with some nifty inventions and techniques to make sure their land was fertile and their plants were happy. First off, they had the genius idea of using ox-drawn plows. They had two types of plows, heavy and light. The heavy plow would strut its stuff, cutting deep furrows in the soil, while the lighter plow followed behind, fluffing up the earth. But they didn't stop there. After plowing, the Egyptians would break up clumps of soil and sow the rows with seeds. To give those seeds a good old squish into the furrows, they'd march their livestock across the field, effectively closing up the furrows. But hey, all that hard work would be pointless if their seeds were as dry as the Sahara. That's where irrigation comes into play. The Egyptians were so good at it that other cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, couldn't help but copy their techniques. Now let's switch gears and talk about the marvelous architecture of ancient Egypt. These folks weren't just skilled farmers, they were also architectural maestros. They built these fancy canals to carry water to farms and villages, and boy, did they know how to make those canals look pretty. Just imagine strolling along a canal lined with ornate structures. The Pharaoh Ramesses the Great was quite the overachiever when it came to construction. One of his mind-blowing creations was the construction located at Abu Simbel. This building was designed so that twice a year, the sun would shine directly into it and illuminate the statues of Ramesses. And let's not forget about the corbelled arch. Without this architectural gem, we'd be missing out on some mind-boggling structures like the Great Pyramid. The Egyptians knew how to make things stand tall and proud, thanks to their engineering and construction wizardry. They built grand halls and inner sanctums that make your jaw drop, and some of these temples doubled as astronomical observatories.
On October 30th, 1759, the inhabitants of the Middle East were jolted awake by an earthquake. Cracks appeared in the walls of their homes, roofs began to crumble. People ran out of their homes and gathered in open areas. But because of strong shocks, they kept losing their footing and falling. A month later, there was another earthquake, but it turned out to be even stronger. Trees broke, houses collapsed, deep cracks appeared in the ground. The disaster lasted for 2 minutes. Oases, roads, and cities were destroyed. Incredibly, Baalbek's ancient buildings withstood earthquakes. Some historians state that this majestic and mysterious place was built during the Roman Empire, but many researchers disagree. Whatever the truth is, the city is one of the main archaeological phenomena of humankind. The most amazing building of Baalbek is the Temple of Jupiter. The inhabitants of the Roman Empire believed that Jupiter held power over lightning and thunder. The building looked like a platform with 54 columns. A massive roof rested on these columns. Today, you can only see 6 70-foot-high columns. Each of them consists of 3 sections and resembles a pencil. The cores of these pencils were made of lead. This made the columns exceptionally strong. Each of these pieces of stone weighed an incredible 80 tons. That's the weight of 35 Ford Explorer SUVs. Look, this is the largest block in the Great Pyramid of Giza. But compared to the blocks from Baalbek, it doesn't even look that impressive. The foundation under the Temple of Jupiter was preserved. That's how specialists figured out it consisted of about 25 monolithic stones, weighing 450 tons each. It means that the blocks from Baalbek weigh almost 4 times more than the blocks from Egypt. There are 3 more enormous limestone blocks in the foundation. They weigh 800 tons each. This is more than twice the weight of a Boeing 747 plane. Ancient builders must have had a hard time carving such giants from a piece of stone. And after that, they also had to pull them to the construction site and lift them to a significant height. Repeating these logistics would probably turn out to be a nightmare for present-day builders. To do this amount of work, they would need modern equipment. But Baalbek's constructors didn't have trucks, cranes with circular saws, or electricity. How did the builders of the past manage to do this? Scientists have a theory that includes ropes, winches, and lever systems. Naturally, the engineers of the past made all the gadgets from wood. Around 3,000 feet away from the ruins of the temple complex, there's a quarry. Archaeologists suppose that's where the stones for the construction were cut. They found a block of limestone there. It seemed to be too large, even for this incredible place. The monolith got called the Stone of the South. It was 65 feet long and 13 feet wide. The ancient builders didn't have time to completely separate it from its mother rock. A group of scientists from Austria estimated that this piece of limestone weighed more than 1,000 tons. That's like 3 Boeing aircraft or 160 African elephants. There was another surprise awaiting the archaeologists near the Stone of the South. It was the second monolith that weighed more than 1,200 tons. But the ancient builders didn't stop at that. They continued to work. In 2014, in the same quarry, German archaeologists unearthed a block that weighed 1,650 tons. No one has figured out yet why people of the past needed a piece of stone that weighed as much as 125 school buses. It's also unclear how they were going to move this giant and why they didn't finish the job. In any case, this third monolith is the largest processed piece of stone in human history. there are more questions than answers. Some researchers believe that people of the past had high-tech equipment. Others don't think so, but are eager to understand how the builders managed to move those stones. There's a huge number of ancient buildings and artifacts on the planet. Lots of them make researchers scratch their heads. Near the Pyramid of Djoser in Egypt, archaeologists have found a network of tunnels. This place is called Serapeum. It contains 24 sarcophagi, weighing from 70 to 100 tons. The giant boxes are carved from a single piece of granite and covered with heavy lids. The sarcophagi are perfectly symmetrical. To the touch, their walls are as smooth as glass. Even with the current level of technology, this is very difficult to do. But the ancient Egyptians managed this feat. The Lycurgus cup is a priceless artifact and example of ancient nanotechnology. It's made of glass that can change its color. If you put a source of light in front of the cup, it turns green. If the light is behind the goblet, it becomes deep red. In this case, the figure of Greek king Lycurgus turns pale purple. Scientists understood how this color change worked only at the end of the 20th century. Through microscopes, they saw nanoparticles of silver, gold, and copper. They had been added to the glass matrix. Thanks to this, you can observe a color change called dichroism. Interestingly, the gold and silver were grounded into a fine dust. It's almost impossible to do this by accident. Most likely, the ancient experts knew for sure what they were doing. Bolivia has a curious place called Pumapunku. It looks as if an ancient giant played there with an enormous construction set. And after the game, they forgot to put the pieces back into the box. But there are no giants, and the huge stone blocks were carved by ancient builders over 1,500 years ago. Some of the rocks weigh 100 tons. The blocks were brought to an altitude of almost 13,000 feet above sea level from the quarry 60 miles away from the construction site. There's no forest in that area. This means the builders couldn't use trees to make wooden rollers. The monument belongs to the Inca civilization. Scientists are sure they didn't know anything about wheels. In 1992, the inhabitants of a Chinese village decided to drain a pond. Their ancestors had been using it to wash clothes and catch fish for hundreds of years. They kept pumping the water out for 17 days. At the bottom of the reservoir, they made an unexpected discovery. The villagers saw an entrance to a cave going down to a depth of 100 feet. The incredible find was named the Longyu Caves. Unknown builders carved out 320,000 square feet of galleries. There are separate rooms, bridges, pools, and columns that support the ceiling. The walls of the cave are covered with strange carved lines and patterns. Scientists haven't found any information about who built the caves and why they did it. The construction technology also remains a mystery. Antonio Stradivari lived in Italy in the 18th century. He created musical instruments. More than 600 of his works have survived to this day. 500 of them are violins. One of the instruments was sold at auction for $16 million. The violins made by this master sound clear and deep. Researchers can't understand why Stradivarius instruments produce such unique sounds. Perhaps it's all about the varnish the master used to cover the violins. The answer may also lie in the wood the instruments are made of. In those days, Europe had a cold climate. Because of this, the wood became denser, and the instruments made of it sounded especially pleasing to the ear. In the Indian city of Delhi, there's a 23-foot-high pole. It weighs 6.5 tons and is made of 98% wrought iron. The 1,600-year-old pillar has no signs of rust or decay. Scientists believe that the monument is so well preserved thanks to the dry weather and the chemical composition of the metal. It might be resistant to corrosion. And still, researchers don't know how the blacksmiths managed to make an iron pillar that's not afraid of rust. It seems like a tough feat, even for modern metallurgists. The Al-Nasla rock is divided into two parts by a perfectly straight slit. Each boulder stands on a small pedestal. Some people believe this is the evidence of ancient laser technology. But geologists think the split happened due to the ground shifting or natural vibrations that occurred under the rock. This process led to the appearance of the crack. It had been deepening for thousands of years, and gradually, the natural monument took the form you can see today.
It happened 66 million years ago. Hey, it could have been September. A massive asteroid slammed into Earth, bringing along chaos and devastation. The tragic aftermath of the terrifying collision led to the extinction of dinosaurs. Yes, I'm talking about the Chicxulub asteroid that left a massive crater in Mexico and changed life on Earth forever. And now, it turns out it wasn't the only cosmic rock to hit our planet during that time. Scientists have just confirmed there was another asteroid. This second space rock wasn't as big as Chicxulub, but it still packed a punch. It crashed to the ground off the coast of West Africa, smashing into the ocean and leaving a crater called the Nadir crater. And tell you what, it wasn't a small splash. The impact was so powerful, it triggered a whole tsunami. It was more than 2,600 feet high, almost as high as the Burj Khalifa, the tallest man-made structure in the world. But how did we come to the conclusion that there was a second impact? Well, this researcher spotted the Nadir crater in 2022. Dr. Nicholson was looking for some high-tech scans of the ocean floor when he noticed a massive 5.5-mile-wide depression under almost 1,000 feet of water. Well, he thought it could be an asteroid impact crater, but at the time, the evidence he had wasn't solid. But now, scientists have confirmed that this is the real deal. A second asteroid did hit Earth during the dinosaur extinction era. Now, let's see how they figured all this out. For one thing, there were those super high-resolution 3D seismic images. They allowed researchers to peel back layers of the ocean floor and get a crystal-clear look at the crater. It was like going from a blurry old ultrasound to the kind of 3D scans where you can see every little feature. Their findings confirm that the crater was left by an asteroid, somewhere between 1,500 to 1,640 feet wide. And it didn't just create a hole in the ground. The impact was so intense that it produced a central peak, formed escalating ridges around the crater, and even left a damage zone that stretched out for thousands of miles. Using those super detailed images, the scientists have managed to reconstruct what happened right after the asteroid hit the surface of our planet. First, it slammed into the ocean, creating an initial bowl-shaped crater. As the shockwave spread, the seabed was shaken so violently that it triggered landslides, and the soft sediment surrounding the crater collapsed inward, creating a noticeable brim. As you already know, the impact also triggered a tsunami, and it was so shockingly powerful that its waves didn't just go outward, they actually turned back towards the crater, leaving huge scars on the ocean floor. And this wasn't just one big wave. No, it was a whole series of them, a train of tsunamis smashing everything in their path. Now, this second asteroid impact is a huge deal for scientists. It's a rare opportunity to study a marine impact crater in such incredible detail. There are only about 20 confirmed marine craters in the world, and none of them have been captured with this level of precision before. Plus, this data allows scientists to test new ideas about how craters form in water. You see, unlike craters on land, marine craters are hidden under layers of sediment, which makes them tricky to study. But with this new 3D imaging, we can look at the crater in all its layers. It's like slicing into a cake to see what's inside. Dr. Nicholson and his team are now dreaming of drilling into the crater and recovering samples from deep below the ocean floor. This would allow them to measure the shock pressure during the impact and figure out what happened in the minutes, hours, and days following the collision. Of course, the Chicxulub asteroid is still the star of the show when it comes to the dinosaurs' extinction. This space traveler was giant, somewhere between 6 and 9 miles wide. It hit Earth at a devastating angle, sending vaporized rock and gas into the atmosphere. It caused an impact winter that lasted for 15 years, because all that stuff blocked out the sun and plunged Earth into darkness. Now, probably the most intriguing thing is that some experts think the Nadir asteroid might have been a chunk that had broken off from Chicxulub before it hit Earth. It's still just a theory, but if true, it could mean that Earth got hit by a double whammy from space. Now, let's travel back in time to the year 1908 in Siberia. Look around. You see nothing but trees and rivers. And suddenly, a huge object, around 150 to 300 feet in diameter, dashes through the Earth's atmosphere. Is it a comet? An asteroid? Scientists aren't sure. What they do know for sure is that this intruder blew up in the sky over Tunguska, leading to one of the most powerful blasts in recorded history. It completely leveled the forest below, knocking out 80 million trees over an area of around 830 square miles. and that's an area larger than that of cities like Los Angeles or New York. The trees were literally flattened, and their trunks were stripped of branches. They were also arranged in a bizarre radial pattern around the epicenter. But what if this explosion had happened over a city? Every single building would have been destroyed, and countless lives would have been lost. Luckily, this disaster occurred in a super remote part of Siberia. The creepiest thing, though? When scientists finally reached the area years later, they found no impact crater. No wonder it led to even more mystery. The most logical explanation is that when the object went off in the sky, probably around 3 to 6 miles above the ground, it blew up before it could hit the ground, and still, it didn't stop the blast from leveling an entire forest. Fast forward to 2013 and another mind-blowing event, this time over a much more populated area, the city of Chelyabinsk. It was a regular February morning when an asteroid about 60 feet in diameter entered Earth's atmosphere, lighting up the sky. It was moving at a staggering speed of around 43,000 miles per hour. It blew up in midair, about 18 miles above the city. It was a horrific view, but luckily, the asteroid disintegrated high enough in the atmosphere without hitting the ground. If it had touched down, the city would have been in big trouble, because even though there was no direct impact, the explosion still created a shockwave that tore through the atmosphere, hitting the ground with enough force to shatter windows all over the place. The blast damaged around 7,200 buildings, but fortunately, there were no direct fatalities. Still, it was a major wake-up call. This wasn't just some far-off cosmic event like Tunguska. This asteroid exploded over a modern populated area, and the damage was very real. The good news? Scientists are getting better at spotting such objects before they get too close. Space agencies around the world, like NASA, are tracking near-Earth objects to figure out which ones could pose a risk. But as we can see from these two events, sometimes space rocks can still sneak up on us. And while the chances of a major impact are low, the stakes are really high. At the moment, there's one asteroid that NASA's keeping an eye on. It's called Bennu, and it's about the same size as the Nader impactor. Bennu is considered one of the most hazardous objects in near-Earth orbit. According to NASA, there's a small chance it could hit the Earth between the years 2178 and 2290, and the biggest risk date is September 24, 2182. But don't freak out just yet. The odds of the impact are only 1 in 2,700, but still, it's a reminder that Earth is always in the cosmic firing line.
Hobbits might actually exist in real life, but these tiny people don't live in cozy, round homes built into hills like in The Lord of the Rings. They're probably on an isolated island in Indonesia, climbing mountains and hiding in dense forests. Hold up, are they even human? Well, the place we're talking about is the island of Flores, a paradise-like spot in the Indian Ocean. Today, it's famous for being home to the Komodo dragon, the largest lizard in the world. But in the past, it was also home to a very small human species, known as Homo floresiensis. In 2003, experts excavated a cave called Leong Bois and found over 100 fossils of this species. This discovery was huge because it completely challenged our understanding of human history. I mean, previously, most experts thought that Homo sapiens, aka our species, were the only ones that had managed to travel beyond the Southeast Asian mainland towards New Guinea and Australia. But if that's true, how did these ancestors get to Flores Island? Before you answer by boat, let me just say that it's very unlikely that an ancient human species could have created vessels strong and big enough to cross the ocean. Maybe they swam there or even teleported. Jokes aside, the truth is we still don't know exactly how or when Homo floresiensis ended up over there. A recent study suggests they might have descended from Homo erectus, one of the first human-like species we know of. According to this theory, they probably traveled 450 miles east from an island called Java and made it to Flores about 1 million years ago. Once living isolated in Flores, their bodies shrank over the years and they ended up becoming really short. But that's just one theory, and there isn't much solid evidence to back it up yet. What we can say for sure is that they were really short compared to modern humans. At first, we thought they'd be about 3 feet 6 inches tall. But that changed in 2016 when experts found new fossils, including a tiny arm bone and some teeth that showed they were even smaller, about 2.4 inches shorter to be exact. These hobbits also had a very small skull and a tiny brain, about a third the size of ours. They had wide hips and shoulders, short legs, and big, flat feet. Overall, their bones were so small that at first, experts thought they might belong to kids. But nope. Since they had wisdom teeth, it was clear they were definitely dealing with adult skeletons. Very small adults, though. Because of their tiny and curious appearance, the media started calling this ancient species the real-life hobbit, just like the characters created by J.R.R. Tolkien. You know, Lord of the Rings. Frodo Baggins? Anyway, why were they so small? There are 2 main theories. The first one, they weren't a different species at all. Some experts believe they could actually be Homo sapiens, just like you and me, but with a condition that causes the brain to develop smaller, kinda like microcephaly. However, many specialists rejected this idea because the anatomy of people with these kinds of growth conditions today doesn't really match what we see in the little people from Flores. Moving on. The second theory is something people call island dwarfism. Basically, when large animals live on isolated islands, they tend to get smaller because the food supply is limited. For example, there's this dwarf elephant that lived in Sicily and Malta a long time ago, and it only measured about 3 feet tall. Meanwhile, its relative on the European mainland was about 13 feet tall. With a pocket-sized body, these animals need less food, which means they have a better chance of surviving on an island. Another factor that leads to this type of dwarfism is that these animals don't have to worry about defending themselves from large predators. I mean, if you're on an isolated island with no lions or tigers around, there is really no need to be huge. So this could be what happened to the hobbit people. Studies show they lived in Indonesia at least 100,000 to about 50,000 years ago. But after surviving for so long, these short people mysteriously disappeared. It's possible that they vanished after 8 massive volcanic eruptions hit that region. This idea came up after researchers found a thick layer of volcanic ash right above where the fossils were first found. Even with this evidence, no one can say for sure if the eruptions were the reason for their disappearance. And recently, an anthropologist questioned this theory by saying they might still be alive today. Wait, what? It sounds crazy, but he actually talked to dozens of local people who believe they've seen a tiny hobbit-like man in the flesh on the remote island of Flores. In fact, mysterious stories about sightings have been told long before the remains of Homo floresiensis were even discovered. So it's not like they made up these stories after hearing about the fossils. At least 30 people living there claim they've seen, with their own eyes, a creature that is halfway between an ape and a human. It had an ape-like face and was definitely smaller and hairier than a person, but it walked completely upright with both feet on the ground, just like a human. Locals call it Laihoa. But what should we call it? I mean, can this creature be our famous Homo floresiensis? Well, maybe. Anthropologist Gregory Forth has been working on the island of Flores since the 80s, and he says the locals' descriptions are strangely similar to what we imagine these ancient, short humans might have been like. You might be wondering if the Laihoa is just a legend, like a campfire story meant to scare people. And yeah, some of the descriptions definitely seem to go against basic science. Some people say that after they saw the creature, it just flew off or disappeared like magic. But the researcher points out that a lot of locals also gave very detailed physical descriptions of the creature. Sure, the details varied a bit, which is pretty normal with different people witnessing the same thing, but they didn't mention anything about the creature having crazy superpowers. Now, Forth is starting to wonder if we really are the only species of humans left on the planet. They could be, in fact, real-life hobbits, And that brings us back to a question from earlier in the video. Are they even human? Maybe yes, maybe no. It is possible that the creature spotted on the island of Flores is actually an uncontacted population of modern humans, but it could also be an unknown species of monkey. However, since there's no other evidence for either of these ideas, the best guess right now is that a creature similar to an ape man could still be out there. Okay, but if this creature shares the planet with us, how come no one's ever taken a photo of it? Well, the ape man is part of that island, just like other rare creatures like Komodo dragons. And unlike Bigfoot believers, locals probably don't go out actively searching for this creature. According to the anthropologist, they have no reason, financial, social, or otherwise, to find an ape man. And since they're mostly unaware of scientific research, or any theories saying these creatures don't exist, they don't really care about trying to prove the scientific world wrong. Forth wrapped up his research in 2018, but the anthropologist says that since then, other people have seen the strange creature walking around the island of Flores. 2 young guys from the UK went there, mostly for a snorkeling trip. But at some point, they hiked up a mountain and saw something that really looked like the ape man. So, who knows? Maybe you'll also get a chance to see the real hobbit when you visit Indonesia.
And we love the thrill and fun we get from the games like Monopoly and Taboo. But what did people play hundreds of years ago? Surprisingly, some of these games are still played today, and you can buy their replicas. Let me know which is your favorite at the end of the video. Let's start with one of the oldest board games in the world, the Royal Game of Ur. Also called the Game of 20 Squares, was invented around 4,600 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. The game was rediscovered when the excavation started in the 1920s in the Royal Cemetery of Ur in modern-day Iraq. The game wasn't only played by royals. People from all social classes enjoyed this 2-player strategy race game. It was popular all over the Middle East, but its fame reached other places like Sri Lanka. Okay, Brightside, tell me how this game is played. It's similar to backgammon. People competed to get all their pieces from one part of the board to the other. To win this board game, you need to have a strategy, but also you needed luck. Besides entertainment, this game had a special importance regarding fortune-telling. The events in the game were believed to mirror the player's future. According to this belief, the game transferred messages from deities or supernatural beings through the moves in the central squares. How come people stopped playing this game? Well, the game evolved with time, and then it was replaced with other board games. Senet is a board game from ancient Egypt dating to around 3100 BCE. The objective of the game is to take all of your pieces off the board. You get 4 or 5 colored pieces. Then you use Senet sticks as dice. Players take turns. There are special rules on how and when you can move your pieces. For example, if you throw the sticks and get 1 face-up stick, you can move 1 space, but also get an extra turn. Archaeologists discovered Senet boxes in the ancient Egyptians' tombs. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and the word Senet means passing. That's why the game was also associated with the journey to the other side. So it was more than a game, sort of a symbol for the struggle to reach eternity. The game was played and admired by Tutankhamun and Queen Nefertari. It's no secret that the ancient Egyptians loved parties. If you'd been invited to a feast held by a person from the upper class, you would have seen musicians, jugglers, and wrestlers waiting to entertain you. You would have probably spotted some people playing Senet too. On the original board, you would have seen squares decorated with hieroglyphs representing additional rules of the game. Some models in our modern-day replicas also have such hieroglyphs. So far, we've looked at 2-player games. Now, let's look at a fun 4-player game. Mahjong originated in the Qing dynasty in China, but the world record for the longest game, which was set in 2012 when the game was played for 33 hours, doesn't belong to the Chinese, but the biggest Mahjong party did happen in China. 2,380 people were playing the game at the same time. In this game, the player's goal is to form melds with tiles to get points. The highest scored player will be the winner. The winner should form a mahjong. The tiles are traditionally decorated with Chinese characters, bamboo branches, and dots. There are more special tiles that have symbols like dragons and flowers on them, and they serve different purposes. The game resembles Rummy, a card game. Mahjong became popular in Western countries in the 19th century, and now you can find different versions of the game all around the world and online. Moving on to India. Krita Patram is an ancient card game. Handmade round cards are made out of cloth pieces. The cards are decorated with depictions of Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are India's greatest epics. So much so that they influenced the way of thinking and the belief system in the region. The game was played in the royal courts, but later it's believed to have been played by people from other social classes too. Before the game starts, a player assembles the cards into a deck and shuffles them to randomize the order. Let's return to ancient Egypt, but this time we'll have a look at a game that can be played by up to 6 people. Mehen got its name from a serpentine deity. It was played roughly between 3100 BCE and 2300 BCE. It's a board game in the shape of a coiled snake. The snake's body is divided into small rectangular zones. And yes, it's a snake game, but not similar to the one on old Nokia phones. Egyptologists say that this game is kind of a mystery because the rules and scoring system of Mehen is unknown. What they do know is that the game was played with sphere-shaped tokens. The players started the game from the tail and headed towards the head of the serpent, which was in the middle. The players had to race to get to the center. Additional lion-shaped gaming pieces added a little spice to the competition. The players had to strategically maneuver their pawns to special formations called blockades. There were some opportunities along the way for players to speed up the process through slides and jumps. This game had something in common with Senet, the other Egyptian game we've spoken about. Here too, the players had sticks to throw on the table, but instead of 2 colors, they had flat and round sides. Ludus Latroncalorum, aka Latrones, is a 2-player board game from the Roman Empire. The aim of the game is to test the military prowess of the players. It's played on grids. The precise rules of the game remain a mystery, though many scholars have worked on several reconstructions of Latrones. Among multiple interpretations of the rules, one explanation is widely accepted. It suggests that players moved pieces in all directions, aiming to surround and isolate the opponent's pieces with their own. Captured tokens were then moved away from the board. This game resembles chess or draughts in terms of the rules, but this one is more about military tactics. Luckily, the famous Roman poet Ovid mentioned this game in his poems, and we learned some of the rules thanks to his poems. I guess Ovid was a fan of game nights. I'd love to see what a game night looked like back then. Another strategy game from the Roman Empire is Nine Men's Morris. This long-forgotten board game was rediscovered in 2018 during excavations. It originated in 1400 BCE. In this game, rivals control their armies that consist of 9 men. Each piece represents different qualities on the grid-like playing field. If your opponent cannot form a mill or lose all their pieces but 2, then you become the winner. In Norway, France, Germany, and many other countries, especially in medieval Europe, there were different variations of Nine Men's Morris. Interestingly, Shakespeare mentioned it in his famous comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream. The next game is Wari. It's also known as Mancala. It became popular in West Africa and then spread to the rest of the world. Here, 2 players want to beat each other by planning their moves. This game requires mental skills and lots of practice. In other words, wearing your lucky t-shirt won't help you win the game. Each player has 6 holes filled with seeds and a bank to collect the seeds. As a player, you want to get the seeds of your opponent. There are detailed rules for how you can collect the seeds, of course. You can play this game at home. Instead of seeds, you can use any small objects, like pebbles, marbles, or even M&Ms. Do you think these games will still be around 1,000 years from now? Chess, for instance, has made it this far, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
It was September 7, 1695, somewhere at sea near the Horn of Africa. A merchant ship laden with treasure was sailing from present-day Yemen to its home port in India. Its escort had previously been captured by pirates, and now it was their turn, as they spotted a frigate approaching them fast. From its mast pole, a red flag with a Jolly Roger on it fluttered in the wind. Once the battle was over, a British pirate named Henry Avery sailed away with one of the biggest catches ever. It all happened during the golden age of piracy, from 1690 to 1730. At that time, all ships sailing across the Atlantic Ocean feared the European pirates, and you could hear "Arr, matey" in taverns on several continents. From the coast of North America all the way to South America, they would engage merchant vessels and steal their cargo. The Caribbean was a real hotspot for piracy. Do the names Blackbeard and Captain Kidd sound familiar to you? Or is it just me who read too many pirate stories? Anyway, as the 17th century drew to a close, the thirst for wealth made some pirates sail down the eastern coast of Africa and into the Indian Ocean. This is how Avery ended up so far in the east, but he was not the only European to sail in that direction. At the time, the Indian Ocean was teeming with merchant ships, as convoys transported luxury goods or pilgrims from Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula to the Mughal Empire in what is today India. The rich cargo included silk, spices, incense, and perfumes. In addition to these goods, the East India Company transported everything from cash to jewels on behalf of several European empires, such as England, Netherlands, and France. Sounds pretty much like any pirate's dream, doesn't it? The most attractive targets were ships that belonged to the Mughal Emperor, whose impressive realm covered nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. Back in the Caribbean, cloth, timber, and spirits were the most common types of cargo. It didn't seem good enough to the most ambitious pirates. They set their minds on more luxurious catch, gold, gems, and silver they could get in the Indian Ocean. Adam Baldridge, who was a wanted man in British-ruled Jamaica because he took a man's life, was among the first to arrive. Through not-so-honest means, in 1691, he managed to establish a safe haven for pirates on St. Mary's Island, near the remote northern coast of Madagascar, 250 miles off the African mainland. The place sat close to major shipping routes between Europe and Asia. Talk about an ideal location. The pirates made sure to fortify the island. As you can guess, they didn't like unexpected guests and enjoyed staying there, having fun in safety. A Frenchman, Olivier Levasseur, and his English colleague, John Taylor, were among the most successful of those islanders. In 1721, they easily captured a Portuguese treasure ship. It didn't go so smoothly, though. A serious storm damaged the ship, so they had to dock at the island of Reunion for repairs. There were important individuals aboard, such as the Viceroy of Portuguese India and the Bishop of Goa. But the loot was the pirate duo's biggest feat. Cash, diamonds, and porcelain worth hundreds of millions of US dollars in today's money. The catch was so enormous that the pirates didn't even bother to rob the rich passengers. But even this heist couldn't overshadow what Henry Ivory had achieved 26 years earlier. We don't know a lot about the life of this Englishman, except that he was born in Plymouth and that he served in the Merchant Marine. In 1694, Ivory became the first mate aboard Charles II, a privateering ship hired by the Spanish crown. Such ships were privately owned and engaged by nations during major conflicts with other nations. Ivory's ship had an important mission of tracking French smugglers in the Caribbean, but soon the tables would turn. Ivory was good with words and led a successful mutiny in 1694. After he left the unfortunate captain ashore and renamed the ship Fancy, the new captain set sail for Madagascar. There, news reached Ivory that a large fleet of 25 ships was soon to leave for its home in India. Apart from pilgrims, the fleet included several treasure ships owned by the Grand Mughal of India himself. Ivory didn't waste time and assembled an armada of 6 ships to go after the Mughal convoy. As soon as they spotted the fleet, the pirates started a chase. They managed to board an escort vessel, stealing gold and silver worth more than $17 million in today's money. And if that wasn't enough, Ivory and his men went after the flagship named Ganjai Savai. It was the biggest ship in all of India at the time that could protect itself better than the whole fleet combined. The pirates got lucky, as one of their volleys cut the main mast of the Indian ship in half, and there was more serious damage to it. Ivory brought his ship alongside the crippled Mogul ship, and his men boarded the vessel. Indian sailors showed some impressive resistance, even though their captain had abandoned them. Ivory's men won in the end, and they got one of the richest pirate catches ever. They filled their chests with hundreds of thousands of pounds in jewels, gold, and silver. After it, the pirates set course for the Bahamas and used their enormous wealth to convince the local ruler to let them come ashore. Their most prized possession, their ship, the Fancy, was included in that deal. Once the news of the heist reached the Emperor of India, a huge diplomatic scandal broke out. The Grand Mogul was enraged and accused the East India Company of plotting against him, arresting several of their high-ranking officials. The company feared that the Indian leader would cancel their valuable trade agreements, so they decided to do something nice for him and bring to justice the pirates responsible for the theft. Together with British ships equipped for search at sea, they launched one of the first truly international pursuit of Ivory and his shipmates, promising a reward to whoever captured him. The pursuit was only partially successful, as they only managed to catch and trial several pirates. Most of them scattered across Europe and the Americas, keeping their share of the wealth. Ivory earned himself the nickname the King of Pirates because of his adventure in the Indian Ocean. Historians believe he escaped to Ireland with his share of the loot using a false name, George Washington. No, I made that up. Piracy was a risky trade, and not all European fortune seekers were successful in the East. Take Dutch pirate Dirk Schijvers, who entrapped 4 ships in the Indian port of Calicut. He demanded money from the local Indian authorities and the East India Company, but they offered him only half of the requested sum. Finally, they settled on a different amount. When it didn't arrive, Schijvers set another ship ablaze. By this point, both the British and the Indians had had enough, and they hired 10 Indian pirate ships to drive Schijvers away, which they succeeded in doing. The pirate captain was forced to return for repairs to St. Mary's Island empty-handed. Oh well. The end of the 18th century and an increased European presence in the region brought about the end of the golden age of piracy. As the British authorities increased raids on pirate strongholds, the number of pirates decreased significantly. In 1692, a huge earthquake that was followed by a tsunami erased a well-known pirate haven from the map, Port Royal in Jamaica. But piracy in the Indian Ocean never fully disappeared. Modern pirates might not have an eye patch or a parrot on their shoulder, but they mean business just as the pirates from the past. The Strait of Malacca connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, and today, around 40% of world trade takes place through it. Despite this fact, piracy was alive and well here even in the 21st century. The national authorities of Malaysia and Indonesia, 2 countries the strait separates, were finally able to curb piracy only in 2016. No, it's not a romantic story at all.